All right, thanks, Laurel, and welcome everyone. So yeah, please feel free to start your video. It's always more fun when it's more interactive, and I'll take questions live. If there's not a live question, I'll go to Laurel's very, very long list, and we'll try to get through as many of those as we can. So with that, any questions from the audience? And while you think of yours, I can just take one right now to get us kick-started. So there's an interesting one here from Amanda at Wells Fargo. It's how to measure value delivered to the customer. And I think this is sort of one of the key questions that underlies a lot of what we do. So I had just a fascinating podcast recording with a colleague of mine at Lloyd's Bank. It'll be going live on the product podcast. I was with Justin Watson. We did it yesterday. And I'll just really quickly tell some of his story. I don't want to do too much of a spoiler for that podcast, but he came from a lean background and spent a lot of time in lean manufacturing, and actually spent a lot of time working on transforming the front office operations of Lloyd's Bank. And he realized that when there were different ways of approaching the transformation, you could focus on processes and improving the processes. You could focus on costs and look at lowering costs around support for better customer service, scaling better customer service. And this is, of course, mortgage services, insurance, and those kinds of things. Or you could look at just focusing entirely on customer service. And the thing that he noticed is that if you focused on costs would go up invariably. And there are some principles around lean where this happens. If you focused on process, you'd make these great processes, but they'd be more around internal process than around value delivery to the customer. But if you focused on the customer and on flow, so basically reducing the flow of value to the customer, reducing the time that it took to flow value to the customer, you would actually end up with much better customer experiences with lower cost. So this is really the stories behind some of the guiding principles for the flow framework, where if you just take the most meaningful customer metric, where in the case of, say mortgage products in this story from Lloyd's Bank, that metric was how quickly you could get a customer onto a mortgage product. And if you rearranged all your processes around that, your cost structures around that, your costs would actually drop and you'd have better customer service for less. So Justin's now applying these principles to Lloyd's Bank IT operations themselves. But the whole point of the story is that I think if you need to come up with a metric that's going to be a leading indicator of value to the customer. And of course, the challenge is that if you think of the flow framework, we've got the top left is flow metrics. The top right is the business results. So you need to have for each product value stream, you need a business result that's meaningful to the customer. And of course, to Lloyd's Bank, it's how many customers they've onboarded to mortgage products and what the revenue from those are. So it's a pretty obvious business value metric. However, that's a lagging indicator. And that's the whole challenge that I'm noticing, is that if you've got an over focus on lagging indicators, it's too easy to start obsessing about the internal processes, obsessing about the costs. If you can do what they did, which is to have flow as the metric, and in this case, flow time, how long it takes to get value to the customer, you actually end up looking at things very differently. So I think the best leading indicator that I've noticed is for value to the customer is flow time. And the flow time is the time from when you wanted to get something, the customer requested something, be that a new feature, a fix for a defect, some kind of incident that was being experienced, a new control that you need to implement, a new security fix, is the flow time, basically how long it takes for each value stream to deliver a value to the customer, is the best leading indicator of how much value you're delivering to the customer, and the best leading indicator of value. And recently I was quite inspired by some of the work that I should have read way before, ages ago, but I didn't actually read till fairly recently, of Adrian Cockcroft. He wrote this pretty amazing and very simple, which makes it even more amazing, white paper called Cloud for CEOs. And that white paper says measure innovation with one metric. So what Adrian's been realizing, and there's another project, the product podcast, where he talks about this. What Adrian's been realizing is that a lot of cloud transformations are actually not done with this principle in mind, this principle of value to the customer. So what Adrian says in Cloud for CEOs, Adrian Cockcroft is one of the vice presidents at AWS. He's also responsible for Netflix cloud infrastructure. He said there's only one metric that matters for cloud, and that metric is time to value. And time to value is just flow time, right? Flow time is how we measure time to value for value streams. So if you focus on that one metric, you'll actually get more value to the customer because you're delivering that value more quickly. And you're also able to learn as a business what the next units of value are. So you're actually measuring value and learning what the customer needs. Whereas if you take it from the perspective of so many organizations that I'm seeing still today is the cloud initiatives are really a cost reduction and the desire to move off data centers that have been causing all sorts of problems. If you guide a cloud transformation with that, I've seen these cloud transformations where the time to value for customers, the flow time, isn't increasing at all. So you've made this really large investment in amazing cloud infrastructure, which economically I completely agree is necessary, but you've not fixed the other parts of your processes, your silos, and your organizational structure to actually get more value to the customer faster. So you've made this massive investment as part of the digital transformation in cloud, and nothing's really changed from the customer's point of view. So I think the thing I've learned is over the course of the past couple of years is if you're going to measure one thing, measure flow time. And actually, interestingly, in the parallel universe, Adrian Cockcroft learned this as well. You can just Google for cloud for CEOs to get his white paper. If you're going to measure one thing, just measure flow time. That's the time to value metric. That's the time to market metric. That will be a leading indicator that will help all your other metrics. And of course, it'll uncover the problems, right? It'll uncover if you've got a lack of DevOps automation, it'll uncover that your flow time's bottlenecked on that. If you've got a flow time that's measured in months, as many organizations do, well, that's a massive problem because we know that companies that innovate fast, they can measure their flow time in days. So to the point where flow time stops being a bottleneck and you start looking at more velocity metrics and other metrics. But that's been, I think, one of the main things that I've learned is just start with flow time, and the flow time has to be end to end. If you're just measuring it in the Agile tool from user story open to user story close, you've got your Agile team's perspective, not the customer's perspective. And you're not uncovering these bottlenecks upstream and downstream of development, which is one thing as we've learned to measure, as we've measured now many organizations' value streams, we see that that's actually where most of the bottlenecks are, that the Agile deployments and the Agile teams have been, they've actually, the state of those is quite reasonable. If you look at the end-to-end value stream, the bottlenecks tend to be upstream and downstream of the teams, and then as dependencies between the teams that are problems of software architecture and some legacy. So that's where I would start. Any questions from that? So the next one we've got here is, and Carol, it's good to see you on screen. How are you? Hello, everyone else. Yeah, feel free to chime in with any questions anytime. So how do you start to think about products? Are they technology stacks? Are they services? Are they loans? And so this is a question that we frequently get. And I think in project to product, I do wish I'd spent a little bit more time exploring what this is. So I've tried to put in more recent presentations over the course of the last year, a bit more on this. So we really see, it depends some on your organization, but really across enterprise, across large organizations, we see three types of products where they're the customer facing, the external, the business products. So those are the things that directly drive your revenue, your usage, your net promoter scores, all those metrics that are externally visible to external customers. Then we've got that next layer of products, which can be the actual internal applications where they're similar, but the user is internal. So it's almost identical, but it might be some HR system that you're still building in the house or some reporting system or something of that sort. Then you've got a really important thing, and this is where things start getting neglected, which is you've now got the platform products. And those are the APIs, the shared services, the data pipelines. And what we've seen is that companies tech companies tend to have a major focus on those products because they realize when they invest in the platform products, that actually supports all of the customer-facing products. If you underinvest in them, you end up replicating all this business logic, all these customer views, all of these things in the customer-facing products. So one of the main goals of Project to Product is actually to help make the case that those platform products need to be first class. And you need to have, those need to have their value streams defined and modeled. Those need to have their flow metrics tracked, and those need to have their own roadmaps and their own business owners as well. Because when you underinvest in those, you slow down everything that depends on them. And the pattern we see in tech companies is they actually invest much more heavily in the platform products because that fuels every customer-facing product. And then there's a third layer below that, and depends how you count the layers. I said right now you could call it a fourth layer, and that's the actual tool network itself as a product. That's the tooling that you're providing. That's your delivery pipelines. That's your agile tool chain. That's your support desk, your ITSM tools. And those also need to be treated as a product, right? That's a car manufacturer treats the car plant as its most important product, because the better the car plant is, the better the products the customers get at a better quality and cost and economics. So the key thing is to also treat the tool network itself, all your processes around that, the way that you're modernizing it, the roadmap for introducing or improving or sunsetting parts of that tool network. So treat that itself as a first-class product. And then, of course, you're going to then make every IT specialist, every developer more productive by making sure that you're improving the roadmap of that product as well. So the whole point of project to product is each one of those things is a first-class product. The way that you structure them, whether they're, the top products are more horizontal or vertical, if they're more about customer engagements, or if they're more about collections of applications that you're putting together, that's really particular to your business. And I would just say, just start somewhere, because there's no perfect starting point. There's just different ways of slicing and dicing a complex product portfolio, whether it's more on customer experiences or more on different suites or more on different SKUs that you're selling and so on. But the key thing is businesses tend to understand that because it's how they're engaging with the market already. And it's really formalizing it, those product value streams below that, where you get a ton of value quickly. So there's Carol, you're asking a question. Why don't you just chime in? I'll make you unmute yourself since we know each other.
All right. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
you. Hey, great to be here. Good to see you again. So one of the observations that I've had in leading some of the larger transformations is that the focus of the transformation efforts previously have really been about cost takeout. Because too many companies see technology as a cost center versus a profit center. And I think in order to change the conversation, all the way up to the board of directors needs to understand how technology can actually be a profit center. But currently there's no good way to instrument everything for business value delivery. And it seems to me that you have a really great foundation to be able to provide that kind of visibility to a board of directors for companies.
Yes, and I think that is one of the biggest problems is that IT has just come out of a cost center in many organizations, right? It has been a cost center. Now with digital transformation, everyone's, or at least at senior levels, but typically across the organization, realizing that the future of the company is staked on this. And so I think the challenge is if we're using cost center metrics and a cost center approach to measure something that's supposed to be the future of the business, as the business needs to become increasingly digital and customer experiences are increasingly digital, how does the organization need to change? And really how do you shift from a cost center operating model around software to what really should be a profit center operating model? So this is what, this is one of the main underpinnings, obviously, of project to product, is that projects are about measuring cost of activities, but really digital innovation is around measuring value. It's around how effectively you can deliver that value to customers. It's around how that value to customers is turning into business value to the organization. So you think the number one thing is that the organization needs to accept that, and measuring costs won't go away. But back to that story from Lloyd's, if all you're measuring is cost, the point I made in project to product, you're not measuring value, and your value delivery is going to actually reduce, not increase. The point that Justin Watts made, and it's grounded in some research, not in software and manufacturing. If all you're managing to is cost, your costs go up. So it's even worse than the picture I was painting in project to product. And we're seeing that, right? We're seeing the IT costs balloon and the value just not being there. So I think the number one thing for senior leadership is that that value needs to be measured, because you can't manage what you can't measure. I think our boards and our senior leadership understands that concept. So I think the first thing is that there has to be a measure of value for the software portfolio, for the IT portfolio. The measure of costs don't need to go away, and they shouldn't, but we need to figure out how to measure value. And so the question then, the next question, of course, is what are we measuring value for? Because if we're measuring value for, did this business partner get this feature on time on this date, you're not actually measuring value to the customer. So that's the whole, and that's really the whole shift. As soon as you realize that, you go, okay, we have to have these units that we measure value for defined, and those are product value streams. So those are what our internal or external customers consume from us.
Yeah. So I think it would be helpful, across industry, right? If you were able to build into the Tasktop product some standard places to start, because there is sort of a hierarchy, as I'm sure you would agree, from what things the board of directors is looking at, all the way down to, things like claim cycle time, right? Like if you have an insurance company, part of what I care about as a client of your insurance company is how fast do you process my claim, right? That somehow translates back up to, higher level business value. Yeah. And I think in every industry, there really are some standard things that they care about and that they look at. So it would be huge value add for you to be able to have that capability. And then, of course, there'll be things that come up along the way where, there needs to be some amount of adjustment, to what measures that matter to their particular client base. But I think that would be a good addition, because the business people have trouble with this.
They do.
Like making that translation,
Yeah, and there's this is actually good, one of these great other questions I'm staring at right here, which is what KPIs do I need to track business results to flow metrics? So let's take that claims time. So the way that we've been approaching it with customer deployments is that it's two things. The business fundamentally cares about reducing that time for the customer, and so that becomes the number one, the value metric for that product value stream. So we actually, to the point where we've actually now embedded more recently this into Tasktop Viz, into the tool that we deploy, where you'll actually put that metric itself, that business result metric, be it an OKR or a KPI, however you do that planning, into the tool itself. And then all the investment of the teams in improving their flow and the features that they're delivering, and needing to, let's say, bring in some kind of new framework that they need to do in support of delivery, all of that needs to be in support of that KPI. Because what we want to do is we want to see the flow metrics improving, but that flow metrics improvement has to drive the business KPI. And the interesting thing with the flow framework is that these things are just correlated. We're not saying if we implement, and you can do this, of course, but if we implement this one feature, we will reduce the cycle for the customer by 20%. I think it's a good thing to put those business cases on business epics or on high level features and so on. But in the end, when you're looking at it from a business level, what you really want is in the aggregate from all this work that we've put into this PI, into this release cycle, into this particular quarter, that all of those things together, including the tech debt work that we did, actually had a 20% reduction in that time for the customer. And so the key thing is that in the approach of the flow framework, you're always tracking those things together. And what helps is that both sides are then, the number one thing they look at is the same, right? Because we're just trying to get the business side and the technology side to look at the exact same thing. So the technology side is looking at reducing their flow time, so they're able to deliver more of those features in support of that goal more quickly. The business side is also supporting that, because sometimes that will require some tech debt takedown. And everyone is basically just trying to reduce that time for the customer by 20%. And the key thing then is that this becomes a part, so our approach with our tooling with Tasktop Viz supports this. But the key thing is that this actually becomes a part of your planning cycle. So whenever you're doing a release review, that you're reporting both. We decreased our flow time, so we're able to get value to the customer in terms of software features and improvements by 50%, right? That's a huge win in terms of productivity and your internal economics. And that drove a reduction in the customer's policy processing time by another 20%. And as soon as you're having those discussions, it's just magical, right? That's exactly what I love to hear with our customers, because they're now on this path to improvement, both in terms of their internal delivery efficiency and what that means to the customer. So. All right, and we've got some questions in the chat. Let me pick off some of those. From Howard Pope, do you have any thoughts on the transition time to move projects to products, and what are the best known accelerators? Well, Carol kind of mentioned one is you need the buy-in, right? It needs to be framed in terms of a business benefit. So the business benefit in the end needs to be a customer benefit, as Carol just described, right? So whatever that one is, and you need to attach a flow metric KPI to that. Because in the end, you want a leading indicator of we're improving, we're moving faster, we're getting value to the customer faster. We need to invest further in that, and that's driving a business result. So I think that's highly related questions. Carol, someone loved your question here in this question. What do you think are the top 5 trends of how companies are addressing flow issues? The #1 trend is too slowly, unfortunately, so we're trying to fix that. But I'll frame this slightly differently, and this is from Kelly Cullimore. I'll tell you the #1 trend that we're seeing in terms of problems. So we're definitely seeing this as a #1 trend in terms of what people are fixing. But as we've looked at, we've been able to get data from a large number of enterprise organizations' value streams, and this is we both see, and these product value streams, think of them as between 2 and 10 agile teams. So really that team of teams level. And so when our flow advisors look at these, they've actually been spotting and compiling common trends that we see. So the #1 common trend, and just imagine what it might be, by the way, for a moment, because it's to some people it's obvious, to some people it's not. The #1 most common trend where there tends to be an uneven understanding within the organization is actually neglected WIP, neglected work in progress. So we see that instantly because flow load is too high as compared to flow velocity, which means the backlogs on this value stream are growing. The team's ability to take them down is not. The teams are overloaded because when you load a team to 100%, their work actually slows down because of context switching. This is kind of one of the laws of queuing theory. So this is, you can't really fight this, even though everyone tries. And it's just getting worse and worse. So this neglected WIP diagnostic, and then we're starting on these things, flow diagnostic, we encounter it almost everywhere. And so the #1 trend in organizations who have noticed this is to actually reduce the work in progress, because that has the teams do more, not less. But it's counterintuitive, just like it was counterintuitive initially in manufacturing, that if you overload a manufacturing line over 80% of its capacity, you slow down, you don't speed up. You need to, and of course it varies. And the key thing is to understand what the WIP limit should be, what the flow load limit should be for this product value stream, and then to optimize for that. But we're seeing these massive dysfunctions where when WIP gets too high, of course, the business side is very unhappy because they're not getting enough and they're not getting it quickly enough. And then there's scope changes, there's additional due dates, additional work accelerations, which actually just makes things worse. But if you bring down the flow load, you shorten the flow time, all of a sudden those scope changes, 3, 4, 5 months in, all of a sudden those scope changes and those due dates, they actually start easing off because the business is getting more, not less. So yeah, neglected WIP is absolutely one of the biggest problems that we see. Another trend I'll give you is one we call, it's another flow diagnostic called workflow obscurity, is that there's just not visibility to the bottlenecks. And so this is because teams the way that tools have been set up is very siloed, and the tools are often not integrated. Of course, this is why integration has been one of our main product lines. But what happens is there's these big bottlenecks on handoff. So development's done, but you actually don't know how long it takes from development being done to the customer receiving that value, to it running. And so you're measuring both, but you don't know for this feature how long it's actually taking to get to the customer. For this fix to get to the customer, because it's two sets of metrics. They'll sometimes go into two different data lakes. You can't get the stuff properly out of your data lakes or data warehouses anyway, because nothing has proper traceability or integration. So what happens then is basically the workflow, the bottlenecks are obscured. And so the dev teams could actually be moving very fast. This is a really common thing, by the way, that I alluded to before. The dev teams are moving fast, but the customer is getting value slowly because of an upstream or a downstream bottleneck. And it could be manual review process, it could be a security review, it could be a lack of DevOps automation, it could be the infrastructure issues that should be addressed by cloud. So that's another absolutely key trend. So yeah, and we're happy to follow up on this because to me, one of the most fascinating things that our teams have produced is the set of the most common 10 flow dysfunctions we've seen across our customers' value streams. And so these really are the trends. And of course, the interesting thing about the two that I just gave you is that they're actually really easy to fix. If the organization understands that reducing WIP will get more value to the customer, there's not that much change required to do that. There's just an understanding of the problem. And then here's the other key thing I realized. There's a need to measure the outcome, because if you just go and tell the business partners or someone who's responsible for some customer delivery that, oh, we actually have to do a lot less work, and so you're going to get a lot less for a while. No one really likes to hear that. You have to quantify that with, if we bring down our WIP, our flow load, you're actually going to get more in the course of a quarter, and then follow through with a measurement of that. So show them in a quantified way with data that you actually did get more. All of a sudden you get this virtuous cycle, rather than one side of the organization talking, you need to understand the dynamics of flow, the other organization saying, no, we've got real customer delivery deadlines, you don't know what you're talking about. So I think it's getting people on that same page and following through with these promises that the trends, such as reducing WIP, producing more value to the customer, actually hold true in your organization. So. All right, and if anyone else wants to, as I pause to read questions, if anyone wants to unmute and jump in with another question, feel free to. And I'll go ahead and take the next one. So Brian Belleville says, WIPLM is great, but consulting with a traditional company that has months of backlog items and a large number of defects, I suggest using Kanban with WIP limits for both defects and new features, playing down debt as we move forward, and also delivering high valued features. What other views have you to help using this approach? So where that works, I'd say the answer is yes. And I would actually say whether you're using Kanban, you're using SAFe, you're using Scrum, I think that depends on the product value stream. And so just as an example, our SREs, our cloud operations, they absolutely, that product value streams at Tasktop uses much more of a Kanban workflow, right? They're just constantly pulling work, and they've got extremely high flow velocity on that work. Some of our other products, which actually have really significant roadmaps, and those roadmaps have commitments, they have much more of a structured planning process, right? Where we actually have, say, OEM partners, and we have customers who've had specific asks. We have, Atlassian's released some new feature, and that we actually need to support it in its upcoming API that we've got the beta of, and so on. So I think the key thing is, regardless of what style of delivery it is, whether it's more Kanban and oriented, whether it's more scaled agile or something of that sort, the key thing is that you're managing your flow load, your WIP limits for whatever the style is. And it's actually easier in Kanban, right? Kanban's been built around this. So I think, yes, if you can go with that, but also the organization needs to get good at managing it for just much more structured agile approaches, where I actually think there's a bigger problem. So when we see those Kanban workflows, the WIP tends to be less of a problem, again, because it's so baked into the workflow. So Clint Roselle is asking, do you have any customers who have looked into or are using Tasktop Viz to visualize flow through their operational value streams, e.g. claims management in an insurance company? So we've not, it's a really good question. We've not focused there. We focused on basically the software side underpinning that operational value stream. So the features coming into the software and supporting improvement, let's say in that claims management is where we focus. So as soon as that work turns into delivery work, in terms of actually using Viz to track the, let's say the customer's experience with that, that's not where we specialize, and that's a whole other set of tools. So we specialize in as soon as there's implementation or any kind of changes needed. Now it's interesting. Tasktop Viz does get used where there might not be any actual coding that's getting done. Some of that, this could be done through off-the-shelf software. Tasktop Viz does get used by organizations where, let's say, the most recent thing I heard, which I thought was a pretty bizarre use of Tasktop Viz, was a change to a PLM and SAP deployment. So just an ERP modernization, which was all off-the-shelf software, bunch of services and consultants and so on. But in the end, they want to make sure they track that as a flow improvement. And in addition to the project plans that are invariably there, right? To actually see, are we increasing our flow? What is our time to actually making these improvements in our ERP system that we've got a lot waiting on? So it can be done for, I think, where it specializes is anything that's really where you're like building, configuring, rolling out software is where it's good at, because those are the systems where it can actually tap into. And then for, like the front office things, it's a whole other suite of tools. So, which is why we actually have the business results portion of Tasktop Viz so that we can tap into where you're tracking those business KPIs. And that's why that part's so important, is because in the end, it is about both. So, all right, here's another question. How does an IT organization with many shared services, mainframe OS, enabling SSO, federation, IT asset management, cybersecurity, transition to product value streams? Oftentimes, there may not be enough need to have dedicated staff to reside long-term in the value streams. And that's from Highmark Health, from Joe. Yeah, so that's a really interesting one. And so I would just say you have those product value streams. They exist, right? They might be understaffed. Some might just be ramping up and down contractors, but they actually exist. So I think the main thing is just define them and start managing them. And then you need that perspective on what is the flow in this product value stream, and what are the what are the flow metrics, and what are those business results. So how many, for example, how many staff do we have at it? So like every organization, we have Tasktop has a product that we launched 12 years ago, and we still have some OEMs of it, and we actually still make sure, and it's a developer tool, right? It's Tasktop Dev. So this is in a maintenance mode, but it still picks up all our changes in our flow fabric and the connectors that it uses for developers who use it, or for our partners who OEM it. So you're basically, even though something might not be a product value stream where you've got large numbers of staff, you might have a product value stream where you have 3 contractors and you have a very low flow of work. But the key thing is that you see that, and that you acknowledge it, and that the business understands this is not something we can instantly flex, because this is something that we have actually in our sunset zone. So later today, I'm actually doing another project to product podcast recording with something that I think is super helpful in terms of thinking about this. At least it's been helpful for me, which is that these product value streams go into different zones. So I embedded Jeffrey Moore's zone to win, or zone management, into project to product. And the reason I did that is because when you actually look at your product portfolio, you can look at your product value streams, they'll go into different, they'll have different business priorities. So you'll actually have your product, so you'll have your transformation zone as an example. This is where you really, if you have a transformation zone product, that's something that's you're betting the business on. And that's where a lot of the digital initiatives are. But what Zone 2 says is, before something can really go into a transformation zone, you need to have a number of incubation things first. And then if you're incubating, well, you better be incubating cloud. Well, this is what the book doesn't say this, but it's how I interpret it. Anything in the incubation zone better be cloud native, because you've got to be learning so quickly. And if you take zone management, you can only pick one thing at a time ever from the incubation zone into your transformation zone. And the transformation zone, and that thing better be able to produce 10% of your company's revenue. And this is something that Salesforce has applied, this is something that Microsoft has applied, and those are some of the key case studies. So that'll show, that pod, we'll go through this in detail. But the key thing is you've also got the performance zone and the productivity zone. So the performance zone is it's actually what's delivering 90% plus of your top line today. So it's all of those products. And then you've got your productivity zone, which is actually your cost centers. So I think the key thing is understanding what's what, because no matter what, there'll be aspects of IT that are cost centers, right? Maintaining your email system or your ERP, well, you do treat that as a cost center. And so just understand what each value stream is, because if you've got something that's in the performance zone, you shouldn't be spending a ton of innovation capital on that. But it still could be a very important product value stream. You might be okay with some, transaction processing that's still happening in COBOL and has very long flow times, because that's not something that you really need to innovate around in your next transformation zone initiative. So I think the key thing is understanding where, and zone management is just one framework to do this that's been applied by some of the large tech companies that I've applied and at Tasktop. But however you do this, you just need to understand the role of each product value stream, and then don't try to modernize the ones that don't need to be. But at least understand, at least have that visibility, and then the acceptance that 6 months flow times on this piece of our heritage that is not critical to modernize right now are acceptable. They're okay, we understand them, and we're just not going to put much staff there. So that's a really interesting question. Okay, next questions from Rick Jennings, or at least the bottommost questions from Rick Jennings. And by the way, we will collect all these and answer them. We've got, what are some of the effective methods you have seen for avoiding pushback from product managers when flow metrics indicate the value stream sucks harder than a collapsing star? What are some effective steps you have seen for working through possible contention when introducing a focus on flow? So that's a really interesting question. First of all, I'm very happy to see especially when large organizations actually have formalized product management practices. So that's always a good start. But the key thing is that and I should mention, there's some psychological safety needed for flow metrics. You are showing, like, are things going faster? They're not going faster. However, once you start doing it, I'll just never forget the experience with a customer with exactly this scenario. So we had one product value stream. We were deploying Tasktop Viz and our flow advisory practices of this large organization, and one product value stream, they had a product manager, instead of like 6 Scrum teams. This one senior product manager with a number of teams reporting to her said, we just have to wait till we're 100% agile. You're not going to like what you see. And she was just very blunt about it. She said, you're just not going to like the metrics that you see. We need to improve. And then the SVP responsible for the transformation and who she rolled up to actually said, no, we want to see your problem so that we can help, right? We want to see where your flow metrics suck. Suck harder than the collapsing star, because as soon as they actually made those visible, it was clear that so many of them were out of the span of control of this product manager, right? Because obviously she understood where and her teams understood where some of the bottlenecks were, but those just simply were not visible. And in this case, the infrastructure issues that the teams were having just had to get addressed. And there was a combination of infrastructure and the dependency they had on the legacy component in the software architecture. And so surfacing those to senior leadership actually, and getting everyone on that same North Star of reducing flow time, actually allowed an investment, partly within her teams, but even more significant investment outside of her teams, some of the APIs that her teams were depending on that were just never getting enough attention, and that her teams were always blocked on. So I think that's why it's just so important to have everyone on the same page with the same metric, because when it's not a silo metric, as in, you're taking too long to get to our features or you're missing deadlines, when it's a flow metric, the blame doesn't go on one team. And as soon as the product managers see that, which is why we see it as so important to get it into release review cycles, to get the flow metrics into release review cycles. It gets everyone on the same page for improving and removing bottlenecks, rather than a blame game of your side's too slow or the other side's too slow. And Eric is asking what are examples of value stream metrics. So yeah, Eric, just go to flowframework.org. It's flow time, flow velocity, flow efficiency, and flow load. So basically, and that's it. That was the whole point of the flow frameworks. Just have 4 simple metrics that are leading indicators of driving business value through software. And so flow time is just time to value, how long it takes to deliver. And they're all customer centric. They're all business centric. How long it takes to deliver. Flow velocity is how much you delivered of each of the flow items. Flow efficiency is how efficiently the ratio of wait states to active work states, where low flow efficiencies are really bad. And of course, high flow efficiencies are exactly what you're after. And then flow load, which is the work in progress metric. And so of course, these play off each other, right? If flow load goes up to high, flow velocity will go down because the teams are thrashing more. Brian Beff was asking a terrible question. Are you releasing a new book soon? So not soon. I'll tell you this though, the amount of learning we've done in the last 2 years of deploying the flow framework has been amazing, especially in the last year as these deployments have scaled and just the amount of data that we have is higher. So we're very much right now, both myself personally and at Tasktop in this learning mode of actually addressing some of what Carol said at the start, of just making this easier to frame and making that framing kind of more visible in the product and in our entire engagement to have these quick wins for organizations quicker, right? So to make that flow load stare you in the face, point the bottleneck, have the reduction, and then have the ROI very visible. So not a new book soon, but the body of work in terms of these flow diagnostics and common flow dysfunctions. I did just record a keynote for the DevOps Enterprise Summit and another version of that talk for the Global Safe Summit. So those will be going live. And I guess DevOps Enterprise Summit is next week, and the Safe Summit is, I think, at the end of the month or the first week of November. So I actually do relate some of the biggest findings that our flow advisors have found in the most common flow dysfunctions. And then we're going to keep collecting those and basically communicating them out. As soon as we find them, we want you to be able to spot whether those are visible in your organization. But that's really the body of material that's kind of informing what's to come after project to product. And interestingly, the flow framework is, I thought that a year in, I'd want to release version 1.5. And that's held. It's not like there was, I was obviously concerned that that's why I talked to a lot of every thought leader that I knew around, is there really a fifth flow item? So thankfully we've not discovered a fifth flow item or a fifth flow metric at this stage. So that we had enough data, thankfully, from our customers that those have held. So I don't foresee any need to make any large changes in the flow framework, although it will of course evolve over time as we learn more and more. But right now it's those easier flow diagnostics and just faster time to value with them. So yeah, I think for me the big thing is actually almost scoping down the initial rollouts of the flow framework to not focus on all 4 flow metrics. I'll just give you an interesting example. At Tasktop, we basically don't look much at flow time, because once your flow time, once it's under 2 weeks, once you're measuring it in days, it's just no longer a bottleneck. Things are moving fast enough, and flow efficiency becomes super important. And I've seen this in customers as well. Once flow time is brought down, flow efficiency is key. It's what you need to optimize next, because it's where your developers get stuck. Increase flow efficiency, your staff is happier, just as an example, right? They're less frustrated, they're waiting less, they get stuck less, they have less friction. So, but in every organization we've ever worked with, flow time is the first thing they should focus on, right? It's already an extremely advanced organization that's doing A/B testing, that's cloud native, where flow time's not a bottleneck in our experiences. So I think the big thing has been is sort of focusing those journeys, measuring the impact, and that's actually by using just a subset of the flow framework, is what I've noticed. So. All right, let's look another question. Are you seeing examples of things that don't map, this from Mark Sharon, that don't map well to the 4 flow categories? Maybe Horizon Zero work, maybe related to decommissioning. So I'm seeing one thing that people are finding a bit awkward, but I think it's still okay. So the thing that we toyed around, Carmen Diardo and I he's one of our flow advisors, spent a bunch of time on this prior to publishing Project to Product, is did there need to be a separate flow item type for improvement? So I think this has been one of the most interesting and important ones. So we see, and this is for improving the flow in a value stream. Let's say you've got a disconnect between ServiceNow and Jira or something. You need to improve that. That's like one of the most common flow bottlenecks that we see in tool chains, or between ADO or using multiple agile tools or something of that sort. So we actually, this is the answer to this is no, you need to make that improvement its own product value stream. And that's basically, it's its own roadmap. You have all sorts of disconnects and automation issues in your tool chain. Everyone does, right? I was just actually speaking with the executive yesterday, the executive I work with at BMW, and he was telling me how they just reduced the takt time, how long it takes to produce some of their new electric vehicles by another 10 seconds, right? They're just constantly, and I think it was brought, so well, I won't give the absolute values, but that's a significant number in a plant to reduce the takt time. So improvement needs to be baked in, and improvement needs to be its own product value stream. So this is the improvement. In their case, they're constantly working. They treat their plant as a product, the assembly line as a product. So they're constantly looking at improving that and improving the flow through that. So it's just critical that those platform value streams, those toolchain value streams, that they're first class, and that the features on them are improvements. So just as a concrete example, when an automotive customer of ours spotted a bottleneck and this is not BMW, in their IT operations, spotted a bottleneck in how they're consuming open source software, because the legal reviews of the open source licenses, the software teams are constantly getting blocked on. So to improve that, you actually push that work down to the tool network team, and they actually should implement some automated, this is license scanning. That's exactly what we do at Tasktop. We did it, 4 or 5 years ago when our license, we've always had pretty significant license consumption, but things got more complex where we're using more artifacts. And so of course we completely, that was a feature for our tool network team. And they implemented automated license scanning, where if some code or a dependency is added that doesn't meet our criteria, the build stops, and there's a defect created for that team who did it. And so I think that's the way that you want to think about improvement. So that and decommissioning is part of that. So I think basically decommissioning is work that you're doing on a value stream, and I think it's first class work. I think that the thing that one of the things that I love about the Zone 2 Win book is that Jeffrey Moore states that you need a completely separate product executive and leadership for values for products that you're sunsetting, because it needs to be it can't be the side job. It's actually a first-class activity for a technology company who's built up a lot of legacy, as a lot of older technology companies has, to sunset those products, to manage those customers, to make sure that security fixes are still being implemented. So it's a very different kind of flow distribution that they manage, but you still actively manage that kind of work. And yeah, my point being is you manage it with flow metrics, just with very different flow distributions of, basically ramping down all feature work to reduce costs on those products, but still making sure that they meet their promises. So. All right, let's see. Next question. Let's take one from Hugh, from Melissa at Humana. What is the easiest way to explain value streams to stakeholders working in project models? So I think, again, it's a good question. It goes back to customer value. So in the end, so let's say, and this has been quite interesting to me, is that just how engaged and helpful typically the PMO has been in supporting this, right? The PMO wants to help the business gain visibility into the delivery of value and the management of cost and the success of projects, right? So one example is, let's say you've got these large project umbrellas where there's some large project that's being delivered. An example would be I did this in the webinar with Jim Coulson from Cubic, right? They have 10-year projects where they're doing the transportation software and hardware for cities, for Chicago, for London, for all these cities, right? There's no way of getting that. That is a 10-year project. There's just no question of it being a 10-year project. Cities have their own needs. They have just tons and tons of requirements that they think are completely bespoke to them and so on, right? So that's a project structure for engaging with a complex customer and a complex software domain. But what you do below that is you can still track your product value streams and your flow metrics. Because the problem with these kinds of projects is they actually result in an underinvestment in your platforms. Because those projects never say, you know, you need a great Kafka backend to make any of this efficient and scaling, right? It actually just gives you requirements on what the user experience should be. So by actually within a project structure saying the way that we're gonna make this project successful, and here's the way that you really get your project manager's attention, is the way that we're gonna know whether we're tracking to this and whether we're off track is by measuring flow. Because we know if we're partway to this project and we've built on something of ours that's got too much tech debt, that won't ever show up in the project plan. The project plan will look green. Meanwhile, the flow metrics are the velocity of our development is going to be going down every week because we're building on something we shouldn't have built on. And you'd better know that so that we have enough time to re-platform that component and actually make the project successful. So you just have, I don't know any other way, but you have to blend that project structure with a product structure at the right level. And the way that you get the PMO or the project leaders engaged is that they're actually going to have much more meaningful, much more real-time metrics to whether things are on track or off track for the software parts of the delivery, where the project metrics are almost meaningless. They don't tell you, or they're just very lagging indicators on whether people think they'll meet the deadline. They don't actually show you the dynamics, which is that you've made a wrong decision over here, and this thing will slip indefinitely. So. All right, we've got another question here. Value stream identification at portfolio level sometimes can be confusing. This is from Daniel de Amaral. I have been using customer journeys to open this discussion and start to map business and IT capabilities with customers' touch points. Do you believe that can be a good approach as well? Yes, I think that's a great approach. So I think, and keep in mind the flow, and there's some other questions that came in that are very related to this as well. So there's this, I think this whole category of questions that we have is, you know, how does the flow framework help with ideation, with design thinking, with customer journeys, with focusing on customer engagement and so on. So I think the flow framework is just meant to underpin that. So I think that work has to be done in terms of innovation and design, user experiences, customer journeys. I think the more of that's being done, the better an experience you're designing for the customer, and the more engagement and business value you should drive from that. So what the flow framework says is that you just need a fast feedback loop on that. So you create your customer journeys, and the faster feedback loop you can have, the more quickly you can validate through software, of course, the features that you're delivering, the more quickly you can validate that customer journey with a real user experience, right? Because of course, that's what tech companies have become very good at, is just quickly validating and pivoting and learning to create these great experiences, because we know it's designing them all up front doesn't really work, right? The Big Bang waterfall doesn't work. You need more of the world of lean startup MVPs and flow. So I think that the key thing is, and this gets us back to kind of the very start, which is if you want to, and I was on with another bank who's trying to modernize their experiences on a call last week. And so they've actually selected customer net promoter score as a way of measuring how they're doing on their customer journey work. So, you know, that's great. That's a good start. And then of course, what you do is that you embed, or in the way that we engage, you just embed that as the number one metric that you're tracking on the business level to, within the value stream. So we just stick it in Tasktop Viz, and we say, as we delivered these new set of features, did the net promoter score go up, or did it go down? Did it stay flat? Right? Are we delivering the right things? So the flow framework it shows you, the flow metrics show you're delivering more, but delivering more and how efficiently you're doing it and how quickly you're doing it. But in the end, it's really just setting up a cycle and seeing that net promoter score go up or down, seeing customer engagement, because net promoter score alone is not enough, right? You actually need to see good net promoter scores and need to see customers engaged and using the experience that's then going to drive the value in these customer facing applications. So it's exactly that. You need to tie those two things together. But what the flow theory allows you to do is actually measure that journey. So, all right, let's see. I think we've got time for one more question. Does anyone want to ask live, or should I just go back to this, to the long list?
Mick, I've got one live, if that's okay. To
Excellent, yes.
Yeah, is that okay? Thank you.
Hi, Andy, yeah.
How do you apportion an appropriate amount of time for the teams to focus on tech debt versus features versus risks, etc.? How do you know what's an appropriate, I guess, optimum proportion for those teams?
Yeah, the answer is simple. I don't. I never know. And I think some people in this industry say they know, and they say it's 20%, or they say it's 50. I heard someone recently say it's 50%. 50% should go tech debt because we have so much legacy. But it's like with those WIP limits, the work in progress limits. It varies by value stream, and so the way that we actually do it in our release, and that's not to say I did have ideas on this. Like 10 years ago, I would say it. I'd say we need to put this percentage of time to it. But what we actually do is in every release plan, the product value stream, so remember it's a set of teams, the product value stream says, in our release plan, we're going to allocate X to tech debt. And that allocation, that tech debt investment for us has to produce a feature flow velocity increase. So we don't do tech debt work unless it's going to allow us to deliver more to the customer faster. Why else invest in tech debt? We don't want to build great architectures for architecture's sake. So we actually also keep very short time horizons on when we see that tech debt produce value. And so we like to see it in under 6 months. It used to be under 12 months, but now we like to see it under 6 months, even for bigger tech debt work, like ripping out a part of a platform and so on. So every release plan, the tech debt investment is presented. It's presented as a flow distribution, so it actually is a percentage of the capacity of that release plan. So say there was a release that was done recently that was 70% on one of our product value streams because we were on some dated backend technologies and we just needed to move. But then that 70% better turn into 10% the following release cycle, right? So then the hypothesis is made, if we invest in moving to some of these modern technologies, then we're going to have to do much less technical debt work next release, and our feature velocity will increase. And that's exactly what happened. So, but if you're not monitoring that, of course, that tech investment can run longer than it should have. You don't have the teams all on the same page in terms of accelerating feature delivery and so on. So I think the key thing is that each product value stream they should understand what the North Star is. And faster claims processing could be the North Star, right? What we started this conversation with. So everyone wants to get claims processing faster. They realize that there's some backend component that's making it slow, some ancient data views that they need to make into an event-based store or whatever they need to do. And then there's this hypothesis with the release plan is if we invest in changing our backend, we're going to, from this relational database to something more modern, we're going to be able to shorten that time, not by 10%, but by 50%. So we're going to spend the next, 8 sprints doing this, or however long it is in this release plan doing it. And then we're going to see the faster flow. And so the team is always saying, this is what we think to drive to the business result, which should be the tech debt investment. And every release planning cycle, you review whether that happened and then plan again. So I think the key thing is that you give the teams autonomy to say how much they invest in tech debt, and then the accountability and responsibility of what that delivered in terms of shortening the claims processing time in this case. So yeah, I think for me, it's been really important that does, unless you've got these big bang stories like the story I tell of Bill Gates saying we have to invest in tech debt across the company. But those are these like cataclysmic events for companies, which happen sometimes. But in a more day-to-day and steady state, the value streams need to be responsible. And they need to, even if you've got this big bang tech debt takedown, the value streams need to be responsible for actually making sure that produces those business results, and they move off that tech debt reduction to innovation and feature delivery as soon as possible. So, great last question. Thank you, Andy. All right, so I think we're at time. Thanks everyone for the great questions. Great to see
Thanks,
you all.
Nick.
And yeah, we'll be in touch answering all the other great questions that came up and looking forward to the next one of these. So thank you.